Welcome back to the series. We're going to go ahead and pick up where we left off. Now, if you missed the first video, there should be a card up top where you can go back, or it'll be in the description. Okay, so this is where you would ask ChatGPT, how do you make a ground floor? Well, it seems pretty simple. We need a ground image, a fill for the image, and just a rectangle for the image, and then we just draw it in our running. Now, if you need it, pause the screen here. This is the example if you want to read over it. Let's go ahead and create our variables for the ground floor. First, we need our image, so let's go ahead and add our surface. We'll add an actual image later on throughout the video. We'll use the fill that they provided for us, and then we need our rectangle. So let's go ahead and draw that to the screen using screen.blit, and it works just fine, no issues. So let's say the next question we want to ask is how to add collision to our ground floor. And it also looks like they provided the movement. We'll implement the movement that we saw there without asking the direct question of how to add movement. And let's see what happens. So first we check for the keys that are pressed. Then we check the keys pressed. If it's left, then for the rectangle.x, we'll minus equal 5. If it's right, then we'll plus equal 5. Think of it as a grid. Minus is to your left, positive is to your right for your x. For your y, negative is down, positive is up. But if we run this, there's an issue. It's just constantly drawing on the screen. When you're learning something new, a good thing to do is to test things on your own. So my thought process might be, let's say, am I drawing the Mario image? No, that can't be it because I am drawing the image in all sprites. I can delete all sprites to verify that I'm drawing the image and Mario's gone. What about the update? What if I remove the update? What happens then? Well, without the update, then the screen doesn't draw at all. By process of elimination, we now know that those two are not the culprits of our issue. At this point, I've tried enough to get an idea of what to ask ChatGPT. First, let's ask how to move left and right to see if it gives us something different. Well, it gave us pretty much the same thing. So now we need to be more specific. Pause if you need to for the explanation. The reason why I try to have you break it down is so that you now know what to ask ChatGPT because it doesn't know what your issue is. To get more detail, we're going to say, in this example, the screen is not updating. Mario is being drawn multiple times. With that, it knows the issue. We're not filling the screen with the background. So what's happening is that we're drawing Mario, but we're not clearing him off the screen. So imagine you drawing circles all over your artboard. You're not erasing the previous circles. So what we need to do is fill the circle with a blank canvas and then draw on top of the blank canvas. Back over to our code, we'll use default values for now. In the future, we'll actually add a full background. And if we run it, now it's actually drawing Mario like it should, but he's too fast. So maybe we should slow down the .x. Setting it to 1 doesn't really do much. So maybe 0.3. Oh, wait, what happened? It just moved to the left and stopped moving. Let's try 0.8. Oh, same thing. It moved to the left and stopped moving. This is a question for ChatGPT. Mario is moving too fast. How can we slow him down? Believe it or not, the first two examples, we don't want to use those because we already know that the minus equals is not working for us and we don't want to use a time.wait. But in the third example, we get a time.clock. What is that? We can ask the question of, show us an example of the time clock tick method. Now, I normally would skip the typing process, but there's something you might run into when you get long responses. Once it gets to the end, or seemingly the end, it says that it's done, but it stopped abruptly. There's no way this is the full code, so you can always just type continue and it'll pick up right where it left off. Here's the explanation if you need to pause. For the time method, there's only 3 elements to look at. We have the FPS, and if you've ever played games, and I assume you have because you're watching this video, that's what the game is going to run at for speed-wise. Then we create a clock object. After all of that, then we just call that clock.tick. So we're ticking based on the FPS. You can always change it to something like 60 FPS if you want to. It'll give you smoother movement. So first we'll create the FPS and set it to 30. Then we'll create our clock object and then we'll just run it in our game loop. If we run it, it's working, but it's now extremely slow. So let's speed it up a little bit. I'm thinking maybe 5 might be a little bit better. It's moving a little too fast for my taste for now, so maybe 4. It doesn't need to be set in stone now. We can always tweak this as we go. So let's move on to the next part, which is checking off our game plan. Don't forget to check off your game plan and add to it as you need to. We created left and right. We started our movement. Now, we also created the ground floor, but we have to add something. We need collision for our ground floor. As I said, it doesn't have to be set in stone. You can add and remove stuff as you're working on your project. So let's go ahead and jump into collision. But before we can do collision, we actually need gravity because because there's nothing to collide with. So let's ask ChatGPT, how do we add gravity? And it seems gravity is pretty straightforward as well. We need to create a player velocity variable, then a variable for the gravity that we're going to apply. In our game loop, we're going to add that gravity to the player velocity, then that velocity to the player's y. Think of y of 0 being the top and all the way to the screen's height being the bottom. Pause now if you need to read the explanation. Okay, so let's create the velocity for Mario, and then we'll create the gravity of 0.5. We'll apply that to our game loop by adding the gravity to our player velocity, and then the velocity to Mario's rectangle.y. Now, if we run that, you see that Mario does drop through the bottom because there's no gravity to actually catch him. Let's check off our gravity, and we've already searched up the collision, so we'll use that previous example for our collision. In this example, we need to add a collider. We're going to use the collide.rect to check if the character is colliding with the ground. And if it is colliding with the ground, then just update the position to be at the top level of the ground. Back over to the code, we'll go ahead and check to see if the Mario rectangle is colliding with the ground rectangle. If it is, then we'll take the bottom of the Mario character and place it at the top of the ground level. If we run it, he stops right there at the ground level, but it looks like our ground is gone for some reason. Before we fix that though, let's change our spawn position to be a little bit more closer to the ground so you're not just like falling to the ground and plopping down there. We'll tweak it just a little bit until we get the right settings, which I think about 600 is probably going to be good, but just to be safe, I'll change it to about 590. So the reason that the ground is not displaying is because we're drawing the ground before we wipe the canvas. We want to make sure the first thing that we do when it comes to visuals is that we wipe the canvas and then we draw everything else. Order does matter in Pygame. Keep that in mind. You would think that we're done here. It looks like it's working, but if you're new to game development or just programming in general, there's something that we forgot to do. After playing for a certain period of time, it looks like our character just disappears. So how do you fix an issue that you don't know what it is? Well, it's time to break things and figure it out. So maybe a thought process would be, let's remove the fill. Let's see if the fill is causing this issue. Well, no, it continues to draw like it did before, and then it just stops moving and we lose control. So it's not the fill causing the issue. My next thought would be the gravity. Maybe it's the gravity causing the issue? Yes, it actually is. We don't know which part. Maybe it's the application where we're applying gravity, or it could be the collider. So let's break that down and figure out which one it is. So we can start by uncommenting the ground collision collider, and it looks like we can actually run the game without stopping. So it's definitely the velocity. Another thought would be, well, maybe if we just move the velocity into an else check. Well, now we get something super weird. That doesn't fix our issue. But if you look really closely at this glitching here, Mario is kind of sinking. So he's in two places at once. He's above the ground, but each flash he's kind of going down in the flash below the ground. So like always, ChatGPT is our instructor, so let's go ahead and present our problem. Collision and gravity is causing Mario to fall below the ground and disappear. And the issue is that we're adding on to velocity, right? But we're not resetting velocity back to 0. The problem with that is that that number could go from 100 to 200 to 500 to 1,000. So the glitch that you're seeing where he appears at the ground and then he appears below ground and just keeps repeating that but lower and lower and lower, that's because we're applying a bigger number as our velocity to the point where the program doesn't know how to interpret that. It doesn't know how to handle the bigger number. So we can solve that now by going back to our code and just setting velocity to 0 whenever our character is set to the ground top position. If we run it now, you'll see that Mario does not disappear after an extended amount of time, and he does also stay at the ground level. So we can go ahead and finish this up now by checking off our collision is now done. We are pretty far in our game plan, but this is a great point to wrap up the video. If there was anything that I did wrong or you could do better, leave it in the comment section below because we are building a community and we're all growing together.